All right, so I'm breaking this into multiple parts because I personally feel any video over 15 minutes on the internet's taking too much of my time. Honestly, I don't watch many that are over 5 minutes. But anyway, if you watch the last segment, I was talking about the early days of my relationship with my husband and how we started out in a rather worldly, secular outlook, and then talked a bit about the experience of using birth control and our miscarriage, leading to getting engaged. So we watched all that. What we did then was we reached out to the church. And, I was free to marry. I had been previously married, but the church granted an annulment because it was not a marriage that took place in the church. So I was free to marry, and so they started the marriage preparation. It's just pretty standard at that point. Daryl was forward about the fact he didn't think he wanted to have children, but at that point we hadn't had anything done to fully prevent it. And the priest was just don't rule it out. He didn't need Daryl to completely be on board and just be like, yes, I'm gonna do it, let's have all the babies, but to just not completely rule it out. So we set a date. We started through this process, did the meetings initially with our priest. And then as we're preparing and getting ready, all of the wedding planning drama it really does easily take center stage. And so we were having issues with who was going to get invited and whether or not there's going to be alcohol and how we're going to handle the drunk people and what do we do if these people fight with each other. And then the real crux of the issue is my husband's parents, his birth parents, aren't alive. And so hardly anyone coming to the wedding would have been from his biological family. They would have all been his foster family and extended family. And he just was really overwhelmed with this sense of not wanting to have to do the whole big church wedding thing. And I felt it very strongly put on my heart to not fight that. I actually ended up writing my priest a 3-page letter about it because he posed a very strong question to me about it. He didn't think it was appropriate and wanted to know what would make it different than my last marriage, which had not been in the church. So I wrote him a long letter explaining why I felt very strongly compelled to honor my husband-to-be's wishes on this and why we were going to get married outside of the church and do a blessing convalidation afterwards. And then I understood I could be barred from the sacraments during whatever time gap happened to pass between when we were civilly married and allowed to be married in the church. And then we got married in Disney World, just the two of us, and eliminated all of those problems. Had a videographer so that anyone who had wanted to be there could see and witness the wedding. And then we met with a priest in the new town we had moved to, North Carolina, to talk about preparing for marriage. However, during this whirlwind of events where we bought our first house, we moved out of state, my husband changed jobs, we got married, all of this happening, he had also gotten a vasectomy a few months before the wedding. And it was a tumultuous decision, one that I had made clear I wasn't happy about, but I also wasn't happy about entering into marriage with the potential of this constant sense of fear hanging over our sex life. Because for me, sex is important, and he had stressed many times it was important too. So he moved ahead with that, and I decided to lovingly nurse him after the surgery and try my hardest to be supportive and be accepting with this process he was going through. I tried my best. And so we moved forward. So in the diocese we moved to, we had to wait an entire year. From the time we were civilly married, we had to wait an entire calendar year before they would allow us to do a convalidation. In my home diocese in Baltimore here, they would have let us do it in like 2 weeks. They don't have a waiting period. We could have come back from Disney World and just gone and done the blessing in the church, the convalidation, and not have me be excommunicated for an entire year. But we were not in Baltimore anymore. So we had to abide by the rules of the diocese that we were currently living in North Carolina. So I was excommunicated. And the priest made it very clear, not allowed to take communion, not allowed to serve in public ministry. It was hard, very hard. And then in that time, he wanted us to do an extended, prolonged premarital counseling. It's premarital still in the eyes of the church, because they didn't view us as married. So while most Catholic couples might do marriage prep for about 6 months, we did it for like 18 months, really. From the time that we started our initial meeting with the priest in Baltimore to the time that we actually were deemed as having completed preparation and did enough preparation to be granted permission by the bishop to get married. Yes, permission from the bishop, because my husband wasn't baptized. So we actually had to have permission from the bishop to get married in the church at that point. It was 18 months. It was 18 months. Yeah. At least 18 months of marriage prep, so to speak, reading books and meeting with priests and going to mass together. We even did RCIA together. I'd already completed it at that point, but the priest asked me, as part of this marriage preparation and spiritual bonding progression, that I attend with him, because he was going. My husband was going at that point. One of the major things that came up was this vasectomy. The priest wasn't comfortable with doing the marriage because he didn't think that my husband could understand the demands of a Catholic marriage, one of which was the full openness to life. A canon lawyer actually got involved. It's how I learned what a canon lawyer was, that it was a real job and a real career. They got involved and they had to analyze the situation and make the determination that my husband, having had a vasectomy a few months before our civil marriage, after being with me, was not in fact grounds to deny us the sacrament in the church. We went forward with the convalidation, even though it was not possible for us to have children. My husband had said he would be open to getting a vasectomy reversal if it was required. But it's not required. It's not required under canon law. As much as I think that might be a beautiful thing for people to do, it is a fair warning. You are not required by canon law at all to have a vasectomy reversal, even if you were already Catholic when you had it done in the first place. You don't have to do that to be granted forgiveness, or have access to the sacraments. Your marriage is not invalidated. Those are important things to know, that those are important things handed down from a canon lawyer, because the truth is not all priests realize that. In fact, the priest that we were doing marriage prep with did not realize that until a canon lawyer told him. I already kind of knew that because I study canon law and theology for fun. Or I did at that point. I've done it more formally since, but yeah, that a lot of people don't know that. A lot of priests don't know that. I've even seen articles out there about that I think give some misinformation. But anyway, I digress. At that point, we were granted permission to get married in the church. The only stipulation was that he had to promise that if the vasectomy failed, that we would keep the child, which was a no-brainer at that point. So we were married in St. Peter Catholic Church in Greenville, North Carolina, on the baptism of our Lord, 1 year and 1 month after we were civilly married in Disney World. 1 year and 1 month is how long it was before I was allowed to take communion again, and how long it was before I was allowed to participate in the church fully. And it was hard, but I can't say that I honestly regret it, because the truth is, me being there with him in the pews each week made a big impact on him, and is part of what led him to coming to RCIA. And part of the reason I'm telling this story, and I'm doing it in multiple parts, is because it really is an illustration about how the conversion of heart process is not instantaneous for a lot of people, especially when it comes to Catholicism. So much of the doctrine goes against what we are taught from a secular viewpoint, that conversion of heart's an ongoing process. There isn't generally a moment where it's just like your perfect come to Jesus moment where everything falls into line. For most people, it's a little bit at a time. It was that way for me too. I just got an earlier start on learning it. And I think my husband did. So I think this is probably an appropriate place to maybe end part 2, because so at this point, we summarize, we've gone from being very much living our lives in just the standard way of the world, to experiencing a kind of earth-shattering tragedy, to plotting towards a marriage and having a sudden stride forward in a very normal traditional life, to working hard for a long time to be able to get married in the church together, longer than most Catholic couples have to try. And yet, even so, at that moment when my husband's there preparing for baptism, and I'm preparing for confirmation, and I'm trained to be a cantor and music minister in the church, and I'm admitted into a theology program, this conversion of heart was not final. It's still an ongoing process. So it just kind of give you a time frame here. This will kind of bring us to around 2020, right before the pandemic starts. Yeah, so stay tuned for part 3 on how we're going to get from there to the next stage of our journey.